Hey, Leafs converts, Leafs fam, hockey world, what is up? This is the Leafs Convo podcast. I'm Norman James, your host. I'm so happy that you're along for this episode. It's going to be a terrific one because, look, these are terrific times to be a hockey fan, a supporter of the Maple Leafs in particular. It's all just around the corner. The rookie tournament in Laval this weekend, training camp to come next week, the preseason, regular season, one in which we believe the Leafs are going to figure highly in, potentially President's Trophy winners. I don't really care if they win the regular season title, but it is something, and I think it's a goal for this team to strive for, especially in the face of many who are still skeptical that the Leafs aren't the full package yet. I think they're going to be better than we're giving them credit for. My podcast partner in crime, Michael Augello, will join us in like 2 seconds. He'll give us his impressions of his trip to MasterCard Center in Toronto. He spoke with a bunch of Maple Leafs ahead of the rookie tournament and training camp. He got their feelings on the summer that has gone by for them personally and how they'll figure into the process going forward. Plus, a couple of tidbits on Nylander and Dubas and the Maple Leafs and that whole saga. I'm ready to pod. I know Mike is. You are too. What do you say? Let's go. The Leafs Combo starts right now. And here he is, our wonderful, invaluable friend, the one and only, Michael T. Augello. Hello, sir.
Michael T.
I just threw that in there.
Good morning, Norm.
Michael Tony Augello.
Actually, it's Paul, so it's Michael Paul Augello.
Michael Paul Augello. Thank you very much for telling me your middle initial. I'm going to use that against you every single podcast. How's it going, man?
It's going. I went up to the MasterCard Center on Tuesday after the long weekend to check in on the Leafs in their informal scrimmages leading up to training camp, and it was a rather sizable group of there were 2 sessions actually, but the first group was mostly players that are on the radar for the Leafs or definitely going to be on the Leafs, including Austin Matthews, but I think it was 19 or 20 players. And they did a 45-minute scrimmage, and I got to talk to a couple players with the other media members afterward.
So did the Leafs break these groups up? The group that we're expecting to see on the ice with the Leafs, and then the others who are a bunch of cast-offs, or did they figure it out amongst themselves? This kind of seems like it's a little bit isolating in a way for some of those players.
I mean, it's loosely structured.
Okay.
So, I mean, there was and I don't know what assistant coach or, who was on the ice with them, but I know that, the first group included most of the players that are on the Leafs radar or on the roster, like Igor Ozhiganov and Lindholm were there. I mean, Trevor Moore, who I think has an outside chance of making the team as a fourth liner, but more than likely starts out with the Marlies, players of that nature. And the second group was, Jordan Subban and Garrett Sparks and Jeremy Bracco, who I think most people think are going to end up on the Marlies.
The storylines revolving around this team, we know are going to be palpable and interesting and controversial, surround a lot of the tertiary support players, Mike. We know who the top players are going to be, the essential impact guys, unless there are some injuries. So now we have to wait and wonder to discover how the Leafs and Mike Babcock specifically, perhaps Kyle Dubas if he chips in, are going to construct the greater picture that we believe is beginning to form in a championship way. So it's going to be really interesting to see who takes those fourth line spots and who are the add-on defensemen. So I want to talk a little bit about Igor Ozhiganov, Jordan Subban. There's some noise about him on social media. This is a chance for the Leafs to oversee a reclamation project. Jordan Subban resuscitating his career. I've seen those sorts of suggestions regarding what he is trying to achieve with the Maple Leafs, but also Travis Dermott. You might consider him a pencil in right at this point. He did play in the playoffs against the Bruins last year. He was part of that Marlies team that won its first Calder Cup. But he's kind of in between there. He could be a bit of a support guy. He could also evolve, and as we expect him to, into a real impact defenseman, perhaps. Taking the position that Jake Gardiner currently holds right now. One, Jake either gets traded or flies the coop or Perhaps he stays forever, Jake Gardner fans. Anyway, Mike, I digress. Let's talk a little bit about the defensive situation right now.
Well, first with Travis Dermott, because I wrote about him for Sporting News yesterday. I mean, he, like many of the players, has had periodical contact with Mike Babcock during the offseason. You know, he reflected on the playoff experience last year with Boston. And he says he wasn't happy with his overall performance, but, you know, that he's, you know, growing and he's, you know, getting wiser and reviewing his play on video and, you know, has expectations for himself to improve this year. And I'm sure that the Leafs have expectations for him as well, because I don't think he's penciled in. I think he's definitely, unless he completely bombs in training camp, I think he's on the bottom pairing to start the season. And I think that the hope is that he grows into a spot where he could move up into the top four. And one of the things that I've mentioned periodically, you know, over the summer, and, you know, something that I've observed about Dermott for a couple of years with his play in with the Marlies, he can play both sides. He can play left side. He's a left-hand shot, but he also has played the right side in junior and with the Marlies. And it was brought up by another reporter yesterday about him playing the right side and whether he would be comfortable with that, or whether the Leafs had talked to him about that. And they really hadn't brought it up, but they do know that's in his, you know, in his bailiwick. He can play the right side. And, you know, right now you have Riley, you have Gardner on the left side for next year. You have Hainsey and Zaitsev on the right side. And I think Zaitsev is going to bounce back, but I still think that Hainsey is better suited for a bottom pairing role. And maybe in the second half, if Dermott has a really good first half, he could move up into the top four on the right side. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. But in regards to some of the other defensemen you mentioned, you know, Jordan Subban, Igor Ozhiganov, Connor Carrick, who I also spoke to yesterday, they are all right-hand shot defensemen. So they all are potential candidates for that number 6 spot on the bottom pairing, playing alongside Dermott to start the season. And frankly, I would be surprised if Subban makes the team, but I know that in the past, you know, he'd been considered, you know, a sort of borderline NHL prospect. He's not his brother. He's not as big as PK, but he is fast and he is a right-hand shot. And this would be, I think, his third NHL team. So, you know, he's a long shot at best. It would be a great story if he did make it. But I'm thinking that the sixth defenseman right now is going to be a battle between Connor Carrick and Justin Hall.
Does Jordan Subban become that player that the fan base rallies behind, while it quietly realizes that he might not have a hope in hell of making the roster in this new era of competitiveness and expectations being so high for the Maple Leafs? We can still have a little bit of fun along the way and kind of keep our fingers crossed for a specific individual.
Well, there are always stories like that. I mean, and, you know, to an extent, the you know, free Frankie Corrado movement, the Josh Levo situation, you know, they lend itself to fans giving support to a player who is sort of on the outside looking in. I'm with Subban. I believe he is not waiver exempt. So if he doesn't make the Leafs, and like I said, I think it's a long shot, he ends up clearing waivers or going through waivers to go down to the American Hockey League. And, you know, maybe if he impresses them early in the AHL season and Carrick hasn't nailed down the job with the Leafs, that he could get called up and have an opportunity. But the Leafs are going to carry probably 8 defensemen going after training camp, going into the season. And I expect it to be more of a rotation like it was last year. If you remember, they had Kali Rosen and Borgman and Carrick and then Roman Polak all sort of rotating in and out of the lineup. And at a certain point, Babcock went with Polak as the dependable veteran guy. And you know, Borgman got sent down to the minors and Rosen was sent early on in the season. So I think that is what's going to happen in the first half. And potentially a guy like Subban or Justin Hall could be in that mix as well.
I like how you use the word rotation. We talk about filling these roles as if it's going to be ironclad, or that player who comes in is going to, specifically on defense, going to log 30 minutes a game. And that will be a stalwart that will play game one and win 16 rather, of the Stanley Cup Finals with no problems or issues. People get injured, they get sore, they get tired, they lose a step. Essentially, you need to begin building your arsenal, your battery of your complement of championship players right now. And we don't know, when all is said and done, how many players are going to be used in a specific role over the life of a team, right, Mike? So we can argue whether Jordan Subban is a bona fide NHL defenseman, or how Igor Ozhiganov is going to fit into the picture, or how a lot of these support players will indeed lend their support. But at this point, it's important to have these players in position, because you never know how they're going to be used along the way.
Yeah, and I think, what we learned last year is that, and not to say that the first half of the year is sort of disposable, because it's not. If you dig yourself too big of a hole in the first half of the year, it's tough to dig out of it. But we saw that the Leafs toyed with the lineup early in the year. It was more of an extended training camp or evaluation process where, okay, we'll call up Freddie Gauthier for 9 games. We'll see if Eric Ferrer can play. And then they decided no, and they sent him to the San Diego Gulls. And, we'll give Rosen a chance. We'll give Borgman a chance. And then at a certain point, they said, okay, we have to sort of harden our lineup to what we think is going to be the best lineup from this point going forward until the playoffs. And the only change was, the late addition of Andreas Janssen at around the trade deadline, and the addition of Thomas Plekanec. That's more than likely what this team is going to do. They're going to evaluate, some of these players that they don't know what they are at the NHL level, and see what they are, and then make a determination before the deadline of whether they need to add somebody or not. Now, I can say, till my face turns blue, that I think they need to improve their defense and acquire a top 4 defenseman. But that top 4 defenseman might not be out there, and that's why they have to find out what they have in-house.
Good God, Mike. I've been stuck on the image of me as an NHLer being informed that I have been sent from the capital of hockey, where it all happens, to the San Diego Gulls. Under any other circumstance, going to San Diego would be perfect. But in a hockey sense, it's the ultimate in purgatory.
Well, the funny thing is that, we know that Mike Babcock is very particular about the players that he uses. And, there are some veterans that fit into, his mindset of what belongs on his team. And there are some who are not. And Eric Ferrer, he did really well in the AHL after they sent him down. He got traded to San Jose. He played for San Jose during the playoffs as a 4th-line center, and he signed with the Minnesota Wild. So he's clearly an NHL player. It's just he wasn't an NHL player in Mike Babcock's mind. And that's what, with all the positives that you deal with Mike Babcock, the negative is he closes his mind on some things. And, I don't know whether Eric Ferrer was a determining factor, or whether the team would have been better off last year than not, but probably not. But that's sort of the thing that he plays with, is those extra players and whether they fit into his mindset of what a team should be.
If Mike Babcock, wants to survive in this game and not be considered a fossil and not get left behind, he's going to have to evolve. But when you hire Mike Babcock, and every time he gets behind the bench for a game, are you not expecting Mike Babcock to be Mike Babcock? So closing his mind is one way to put it, but deducing whether a player is capable to be a part of what he wants to accomplish on the ice is essentially what he's hired to do.
And I think it's the task of the general manager and Kyle Dubas to provide Babcock with the players that fit his philosophy, rather than players that fit, his Dubas's philosophy. And there hasn't been a conflict on that score so far since Dubas took over as general manager, but we do know there were conflicts like Frankie Corrado, who the Leafs picked up off of waivers from Vancouver, and Babcock barely ever played him because we still don't know the reasons, whether he didn't think he was an NHL defenseman or what. All we know is that he didn't give him an opportunity. And it was clear that Lamoriello thought he was an NHL defenseman, or at least somebody who could be in the mix, and Babcock didn't feel that way. We remember also the failed experiment of Jonas Enroth, who played a grand total of 4 games before Babcock decided, that's not my backup goaltender. I have no confidence in him. I don't like Antoine Bibeau. He played him a couple games, and only when they got Curtis McElhinney was the backup goaltending situation solved. And that, I think, is a sort of a window into what's going to happen with the backup goaltending situation this training camp, where you have him and Garrett Sparks and Calvin Pickard all vying for the number 2 job. And I'm not sure if both Pickard and Sparks will clear waivers. I'm not sure if one of them will clear waivers, which I wrote last week could mean the Leafs have to keep 3 goaltenders on the active roster.
Okay. Kyle Dubas is going to have to deal with, and will have some implications. But whether you have Garrett Sparks or Calvin Pickard or Curtis Mack on Mike, honestly, and it's something for us to talk about. I hope that fans don't lament the personalities at play here too much, because it's not a deciding factor in whether this team wins a cup. The point now, Mike Babcock has to make some decisions that are certainly not going to sit well with fans who are sensitive, mainly millennials, who love competition against other teams, but don't necessarily want to confront the competition within their own world, on their own team, essentially. That, look, life is rough. Players got to be tough. You might like somebody based on a small window of, or you like their personality, but let's refrain or be cautious of using these players as a vehicle to drive home a fictional point that the coach is oppressive and he doesn't care about your favorite guy. Mike Babcock is here now to lead this team to a Stanley Cup. Mm-hmm. And that is what's going to either hinder or embolden, reinforce his legacy, whether he takes this team to the promised land. It's becoming apparently clear that the Leafs are in the mix to win a cup or several cups. If they can't get it done with Mike Babcock behind the bench with this group of players, it is going to look really bad on his resume. You know what I'm saying, Mike?
Yeah, but see, the thing is, when you hire a Mike Babcock, when you assume, when you take on the resume, you take on the sort of the idiosyncrasies of, that particular coach. I mean, yes, Mike Babcock won 2 gold medals with Canada in 2010 and 2014. Remember, PK Subban barely played. A guy who everybody thinks is amongst the top 3 or 4 defensemen in the NHL. He did not play much for Babcock in the last Olympics. He was playing, Dan Hamhuis. He was playing. So he has a particular thing in mind for his team and the way he wants his teams to work. And part of that are the personnel that fit into his strategy. And I'm just saying that, fans are going to have to accept that if you buy into Mike Babcock being one of the best coaches in the league, and I think there are not too many people who don't think he's one of the best coaches in the league, then you have to buy into the players that he wants to use. That's why I didn't understand why people had such a problem with Roman Polak, because Roman Polak was a role player, and he fit the particular role that Babcock wanted him to serve and to use. And I think he did it fairly well. He's not a great defenseman. He's sort of limited, but he provided what Babcock and the Leafs wanted him to provide. And there will be players this year who some people don't think deserve to be on the roster and will be on there because Babcock trusts them and they fit the role that he wants them to fit. And a guy like Curtis McElhinney, if there might be people out there who think that Garrett Sparks or Calvin Pickard are better backup options than Curtis McElhinney. Well, Curtis McElhinney had a 2.14 goals against, a 934 save percentage, and is trusted by the coach. So if they keep him and they don't keep Garrett Sparks, the reason is because the coach trusts McElhinney.
Yeah, Mike Babcock's going to be fun to watch this season because he has a lot of pressure on him, despite the contract and all the money he makes, and the general belief that he's in this position until he decides that he no longer wants to be in this position, and that'll either be him overseeing a dud or him overseeing a champion. But he has to, while maintaining the core principles that have helped him reach the status that he's at right now, he also has to evolve. And we can't watch him. We can't watch him take a player of Jake Gardner's abilities and have him put him in the doghouse and leave him there. Those kinds of things we can't have happen. You have to keep running guys like that back out. On the flip side, I mean, if there's a Ron Hainsey who has clearly lost a step, or he's just chugging along barely, but Mike Babcock loved the way he played in a playoff series 5 years ago, and he's going to stick with him. He can't get caught in putting his, I'm using the egg analogy again, but you can't have him put all his eggs into that basket, knowing that a guy like Ron Hainsey is, if not past due, he's approaching his expiration date. You know what I'm saying, Mike? So Mike Babcock is going to be. We want players to get better. We want players to evolve, but we still want them to bring what brung them. Mike Babcock's in the same situation.
I don't think we have to worry about Babcock putting Gardner in sort of the doghouse. I think it's more the fact that the fans put Gardner in the doghouse. Babcock keeps rolling him out there for 24, 25 minutes, and if anything, I think he gets overexposed. But I actually think one of the things we have to look forward to in the next week before training camp opens, and sometimes we'll find this out on the day of training camp, like we found out about Roman Polak when they released the training camp roster and Polak was on there. Then we finally knew, okay, he's been invited to training camp. Whether the Leafs will invite a veteran on a professional tryout, and we've seen players over the last week or so, guys like Scotty Upshaw and Dan Hamhuis got signed, but Mark Letestu, Troy Brouwer got signed to a 1-year contract with Florida, and there's some other players who are getting looks from other Mark Fane with Boston. I had heard that the speculation of maybe Cody Franzen getting an invite, and he apparently is signing in the KHL. So the analytics crowd is going to be shedding a tear for that. But there are veteran guys out there, whether it be fourth line centers or bottom pairing defensemen, that the Leafs may want to take a free look at, and we'll probably see sometime late next week whether they actually do so or not.
This is the Leafs Convo. Norman James with Mike Augello. Thank you so much for all of your support of this podcast. On YouTube, it's sensational. Our numbers are really incredible. Our subscribership is steady. Thank you. On the podcast platforms that you know and love, like, say, iTunes or Breaker or Stitcher or Flitcher, Twitcher, Mitcher, I don't know. The names are just so trendy right now. We appreciate your support there as well. And Mike, this podcast really takes on a life of its own after 2 or 3 days, as it's being discovered by new, fresh listeners on all these different podcasts. The future is bright for the Leafs Convo, and you, our friends, the audience, our supporters, our critics, are really leading the way on this endeavor forward, and we're really excited for the season ahead. So much fun stuff, and a lot of it is really due to the fact that Kyle Dubas has, and obviously Lou Lamoriello before him, and the organization have put together a team that has a real opportunity to win a Stanley Cup. We talk about the deficiencies on defense, and that's just because we are just so hyper focused on what's going on. And we know from being hockey fans that you probably need a few more pieces on the back end to really feel comfortable about this team taking huge strides forward. But I will say though, the offensive potential of this organization, while we can forecast it, it really is just it's hard to determine right now. It could be something that is historical. It could be something that leaves our jaws on the floor and really sets a tone for the team's progress going forward. And I'm really looking for really excited about what's to come, Mike. What did you want to add, Mike? And I have one more question for you.
Okay, if I was to recommend an article to be read, it would be Pierre LeBrun's piece on the Leafs from yesterday on the Athletic, and he was basically getting a feel for the outside perspective of the Leafs from other general managers and coaches. Obviously not, in confidence, not naming them, but just giving them a sort of an avenue to express their opinion without sort of outing themselves. And the quote that I thought was the most interesting was from a Western Conference coach who said, "Everyone in Toronto thinks they will get the cup. So there's that pressure," meaning everybody thinks that the Leafs are a contender. And I think that that's realistic and reasonable. He says they may have the three best centers in the league, but they have the same defense. And Babcock must make them all buy in about ice time because Tavares won't be getting 21 minutes a game. So it's going to be
womp. Come on.
No, but I think that's really the case. I think, one of the things is, you're going to have to, we saw the little bit of concern last year with Matthews, the thing at the end of the season with him not being happy. I think that was blown out of proportion, but I also think that Matthews wants a bigger role on this team. He wants to be on the first power play. And what happens if he isn't on the first power play, which I think is a distinct possibility. So, I mean, there's going to have to be a little bit of compromise in terms of salaries, in terms of playing time. There's also going to be a little bit of compromise when it comes to, I think between Dubas and Babcock, and also at the end of the year, if it's proven that this team's defense is not good enough, there's going to have to be something to be done in terms of improving that area, which everybody seems to think is their Achilles heel.
Of course, nothing's perfect, but the Leafs have taken major strides forward, and you're going to have, Mike, there are people who have an aneurysm every time you talk about the Maple Leafs in their presence. So let's not suggest that everyone has a huge issue with the Maple Leafs, but a lot of people do. What that guy should have said is, look, they're going to be a bunch of badasses, but if they want to reach the ultimate goal, they have some things that they need to improve upon. They're going to do that. But again, we don't know how the season's going to unfold. Injuries could come into play. This team could be just so overwhelming and suffocating that the defense isn't going to have to. The defense won't be won't be under the microscope as much, just because there's a dominance factor. I wanted to mention about Austin Matthews, and I still have my final question for you. If he's whining about playing time, or if he just demonstrates any sort of petulance or disruption, then he's a selfish brat.
Well,
and I don't know if he's going to become that way, but I don't care how young you are. LeBron James is LeBron James. Michael Jordan is Michael Jordan. Sidney Crosby is Sidney Crosby. And those guys were who they were at a young age. And you lead the team in a professional, generational, unique way. And Austin Matthews has that chance to be a leader, even with a player you could say is even better than him on the roster. John Tavares. If we get into a situation where he's got a problem with the coach, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I mean, there's that suggestion there, and there was some idea that there was a problem, a conflict over with the coach in the playoffs. If he goes down that avenue, he goes down that road, that's going to brand him that type of player for the rest of his career. I really hope he's advised against doing anything like that, especially publicly.
you know, in all my exposure with Austin Matthews, he is not that type of player. He's not that type of person. I think it's more out of frustration because he wants this team to win. He's got a desire to win, and I think that was at the core of, you know, his, you know, whatever problem there was at the end of the year, which I think was massively overblown. I think it was out of I want to do more. I want to get this team to win, and not out of selfishness or pettiness.
Mike, you can't do that. Sidney Crosby didn't do everything to win those 3 cups. He has an ensemble guy. You have to be supportive of your teammates. And I don't know, Austin, go play defense. Go play defense. Go take Jake Gardner's role, and maybe he can unleash stretch passes better than Jake Gardner or make a better decision. But this out of frustration that he wanted to do more, I don't understand. You lost in the first round of the playoffs. So anyway, I don't want to get on Austin Matthews. I think he's a fantastic player, and he can be that guy. He can be that guy, but he could also be someone else. There's a little bit of me that fears that in this situation, if things don't go well, if he's got the wrong people in his ear, and if he wants leadership, he can take it, and I hope he becomes an iconic figure who not only grew as a player, but as a person. And I know he's young, but if you want that leadership role, you want that stature, who gives a shit about your age? You must be wise beyond your years. Last thing, and again, we're talking about players who are really good and who are impact players, and we're splitting hairs, but it's not the contrast, Mike, in our discussions. The contrast to what we're talking about right now could be really pathetic and boring and ugly and dire and desperate. So you know what I'm getting at. We don't even have to go back to those days. So we'll just keep on moving forward. You were at MasterCard Center, and this is a final question, I promise. You spoke to players who will be fighting for jobs, players who will see up and down, players who will be integral to the success or failure of this team. Was there a consensus? And I don't know if you got into this topic with each of these players, but there had to be some scuttlebutt among the media and the players. Was there any kind of consensus on how things are going to conclude with William Nylander and the Maple Leafs and his want for a contract that the Maple Leafs might not be able to provide right now?
Well, the few players that we talked to really didn't have any information in terms of any progress. William was not there yesterday. The only indication that I've heard is that he does not want a bridge deal, that he wants a long-term deal. And if that's the case, then it's going to be basically, we'll give you long-term security, but you're going to have to give us a little bit of a haircut in terms of the amount per year. And that's the tug of war. Again, we've mentioned before, John Tavares did not get every dollar that he was looking for from the Leafs. He took $2 million less than he was offered from San Jose to play for Toronto. And, that's probably what's going to have to happen with Austin. I think that's the guidelines that Kyle Dubas is going to use in terms of negotiations with Nylander, in terms of negotiations with Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. If you want to win, if you want to stay together, you're all going to take we'll give you what, is very good money. We're just not going to give you top of the line money. Going back to somebody like Nikolai Ehlers, who was drafted in the same year that he was, who signed last year with a year left in his entry-level deal, and he got $6 million. If Nylander gets that or maybe a little bit more, then I think that's a good amount for him and a victory for the Leafs. If he is pressing for close to $7 million, then that starts to hurt, sort of the model of taking a little bit less. And I think there's going to be a little bit of a tug of war, but I don't think there's going to be a holdout. I think he's going to get under contract at some point before the opening of training camp. And so we can then evaluate what that contract is.
I hope these guys can smell the cup, Mike, because it's within their reach. And these guys together can be Stanley Cup champions for the most important hockey team that ever existed, for the greatest fan base in the biggest, most important hockey market that continues to exist and will ever exist. They have the chance. And a lot of this other stuff is just part of the process. They need to get through it and get on track, get on pace, get on message and on point, and make it happen. I heart intrigue, Mike. The nosy part of me is semi-interested in seeing what a team Nylander versus team Dubas kerfuffle might create. But just like the advice I give to the players, just get focused on the task at hand, and that's winning a Stanley Cup in a very special place. These guys have it within their grasp. I love the Leafs players, but I love the Leafs more, Mike. That's how I'm going to end it. Have a good one, buddy.
Thanks, Norman.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Leafs Convo podcast. We appreciate your listenership. And of course, look, these are exciting times. So much is in store. And we're going to provide you with content, commentary, and conversation along the way. Every step of the way. That's what we do on the Leafs Convo. We love Feed B as well. Keep it coming. At I'm Sports Heart, at the Leafs Convo, at Mike and Buffalo, or just reach out to us through the YouTube comment section. We have a Patreon page if you want to support the health of this podcast with a couple of dollars, a pledge per month. Please be our guest. We have some gear at bonfire.com. Not really making any money off that. It's just about getting the brand out there. And I've got some really cool apparel ideas to come in the very near future. So stay with us for that. Thank you so much for all your support. We couldn't do it without you. For Mike Augello, I'm Norman James. I'll talk to you next time. The Leafs Convo is out. Peace.